Question now, will these new U.S. airstrikes contain the situation? Let's bring in retired Colonel Cedric Leighton. He was in the U.S. Air Force for 25 years as an intelligence officer. He runs a defense consulting firm now. This is a U.S. president who's been very reluctant to take any military strikes. I mean, you and I have talked about Syria in the past,
yes.
Iraq. Last night when he was speaking, it seemed like he was almost pained making this announcement. Is he going far enough in your estimation?
Well, Mike, no, I don't think he is. And of course, politically, he has to walk it back. And what he's doing is he's having to not only relive his past campaign promises, but the realization is dawning on him that the campaign promises that he made cannot be fulfilled. The world is not the place that he thought it was. And that's a very harsh lesson to get when you are sitting in the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, to all of a sudden realize that the world is not only is a very bad place in some cases, but it also needs a really strong guiding principle to actually lead it. And the measures that we're taking right now are necessary from a humanitarian perspective. They're necessary also from a military perspective, but they've come way too late. This is a situation that did not have to happen, and it is a situation that should have really been contained, at least a year ago, if not earlier than that.
I've heard some analysts say this is one of those freight trains coming at you that you could see miles away. Why didn't the administration see it? Because you're not the first one to say this sort of thing.
That's right. Well, I guess the crossing guards weren't out for that freight train. And the big problem is that the administration did not want to believe what it was being told. They did not want to believe that the political chaos in Iraq was creating a vacuum. They did not want to believe that they actually had to maintain an American presence in Iraq in order to assure some degree of stability. And as unpopular as it is to put boots on the ground in a place like that, first of all, you have to realize that it doesn't have to be American. They don't have to be American boots. They can be other people's boots, but we do need to lead that effort. And the fact that we aren't leading that effort creates a real problem, because there is nobody else in the world that you can turn to in order to achieve the kind of strategic objectives that need to be achieved in order to assure peace and in order to keep these people from fighting each other. And IS, the Islamic State, is going to create such a situation, if they have the get the authority to do so and take the authority to do so, they will create such a situation that it will create an arc of instability from the northern Middle East all the way through the Arabian Peninsula and possibly beyond. And the United States, Europe, China do not want to see that. That's a very, very significant problem that we can anticipate if we don't fix this now. And unfortunately, it's very late.
It's interesting. You're talking about the world not looking the way the president or the administration would like it to look. Iraq, how it looks. There was a Kurdistan official here in Washington who described it this way. He said, "We have our own little piece of land. Our neighbor is a terrorist state. Next to it is a failed state, basically Baghdad." That may be an overstatement, but it really kind of shows what the landscape is in Iraq, which is not good.
No, the landscape in Iraq is not good, and there have been failures in many respects. There have been failures, in terms of the American administration of Iraq immediately after the shock and awe campaign of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Then you also have the failures of the Iraqi political institutions to really take the state and make it into a pluralistic society that it could have been. There were great opportunities. The Iraqis came together in, I wouldn't say quite record time, but practically record time, to create a constitution. They had the ability to put things together, but then what happened? You had all kinds of political machinations. You had the decimation of the armed forces. The professional officer corps was basically removed, and political patronage took over. And when you have something like that, it's a recipe for disaster, because that kind of an army doesn't fight, they run. And we saw that in spades with this situation.
Robert Gates, who was the CIA director, also the defense secretary, wrote this book, From the Shadows, and he talks about unintended consequences, that the United States supported the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union. Who would have ever thought at that point in time that bin Laden would come about and that the United States would be punished with 9/11? I imagine former President Bush never thought, if Saddam Hussein went away, that this is what Iraq would look like down the road a piece. Is this the unintended consequences, would you say?
I think it's partly the unintended consequence. I think in the case of the Bush administration, they deferred a lot to what they thought were the experts. They looked at the military, they looked at the intelligence community, they looked at the State Department, and thought they had a bevy of experts that they could call on. Unfortunately, the political situation and the social situation in Iraq and other countries like it is incredibly complex, and you can't really expect to gain the upper hand militarily if you don't understand what we ended up calling the human terrain. In other words, the sociological and anthropological mix that is now a country like Iraq. And the other thing you also have to think about is that the borders that make Iraq right now were basically drawn up as part of a 1916 agreement between France and Britain, which was ratified by the Versailles Treaty after World War I. 100 years. It's a pretty long time in some geopolitical calendars, but unfortunately it ignored the realities of the ground. And because of that, I think the Bush administration thought that a country like Iraq was almost like a Germany or even a somewhat like a China, where there's a certain degree of unity among the country, among the people in the country. Iraq has unity basically in name only. There are so many different groups that hold their primary allegiance to a tribe or to a religious sect or to both, and they don't owe their allegiance to a nationality in the way that we understand it, and that creates the opportunity for these fissures to occur. And I don't think they took that into account when they were working this, and certainly the Obama administration has not done so either, and that creates a huge problem.
A critical mistake. Cedric Leighton, always a delight to have